All right, it's August 16. We've got lots to get through today. This is the Gateway API meeting. Let's start off. I added a bunch of things to the agenda as always, but feel free to suggest anything throughout. This is just what's been on my mind as we're getting awfully close to V1 Alpha 2 release. First off, on Friday, we met with SIG Network reviewers and kind of gave them an intro to the API, and the review process has begun. If anyone's interested, there was somewhat interesting feedback on that intro call, so I can share. I recorded as much as I remembered, anyways, of that. I can share that recording for anyone who's interested. But the review process has begun. It's on PR 780. I tried a bunch of different ways to make this work and eventually just ended up copying the V1 Alpha 2 directory from master onto a branch that's based on V1 Alpha 1. It's not great. I'll have to rebase a bunch, but it does make for a much cleaner review surface than any of the alternatives I found. So yeah, that's what we're working with. There's been some good discussion already, but I expect that will continue to grow over the coming week or more, depending on how this goes. I was thinking it would be helpful for us also to run through this. It's been hard to keep track of all the changes that have merged in. We just kind of got everything in and then handed it over, which is great. I'm glad we're at this point already, but it would be good to kind of second check our own work and make sure that what we're doing actually makes sense. And finally, my goal, and this may be optimistic, is to release V1 Alpha 2 in 2 weeks or less. So really what I'm hoping to get out of that is a release this month. But I know that it's a fool's game to try and predict when a review will be complete. So this is just my optimistic hope, and we can do whatever we can to make that possible, but we can't control the speed of reviews. So that's just the timeline I've been hoping for, but again, we'll see. Yeah, any questions about this review process at all? Cool. All right, keep on running. So I tried to write down a list of priorities. If this is something that we agree on, I can try and document it in an issue or set of issues. But I wanted to at least have some things that I feel like are required for us to cut a V1 Alpha 2, and others that would be nice to have but aren't completely required. The first one, we might as well get into it. Nick has done some awesome work to version our docs. And in addition to that, I think you've also really simplified our doc source. So instead of having everything versioned, you just have a few pages versioned, which I think is going to be a lot easier to maintain. So if I'm remembering how this is structured, it's under reference. You've got, two different sections in here for each API version. Nick, I don't know, do you want to give any more background on what you're thinking here?
Yeah, so basically when I was looking at the docs, trying to figure out how the best way we could do like better versioning, after a while I was sort of like, well, most of this stuff is the same between the versions, and in fact some of the files are actually symlinked between versions. So I thought, well, why have that in a version directory at all? And so why not sort of break things up and make it, because there's some things that are always going to be like there's only one canonical version, like process documents and release policies and things like that. They're never going to be versioned. And the FAQ shouldn't really be versioned, and the enhancement proposals shouldn't be versioned. So I was like, well, why not take those out and put those as top level nav and then make it easier to find where things are. And so we've done something like this for Contour. And have, like just the reference part is the version part. The part that actually changes per version is the version part. And it's kind of worked okay. I think there's definitely better ways you could do this, but not without substantially changing the like the docs workflow, we'd have to move to a more advanced tool like, a Hugo or something else that does a more advanced, like that can version the entire site, which is like what Cube does. This is kind of ironically enough, a proxy for a more substantial change. This is trying to make what we've got usable rather than build a thing that actually does the real thing that we need.
I
So
thought
I guess
made sense, especially since we are not going to probably be maintaining the V1 Alpha 1 guides.
Yeah.
It just like, we should just keep those guides up to date to the latest version.
Well,
so yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, I kind of wanted to sort of leave it there as a point in time was the reason why I left the guides there. But yeah, it would make sense to move the guides out as well, maybe. Yeah, like they're really the thing that is critical that's version. This is the API spec, right? But some of the other stuff is so version specific that you're going to need to update it substantially. And so being able to have, when it comes time for V1 Beta 1, being able to leave V1 Alpha 2 docs there as the current version and have the V1 Beta 1 docs proposed or unreleased as like we've got here, means that you can be working on you can have the docs for the upcoming version be visible without them being the canonical docs for something.
Oh, sorry, I got confused. So the stuff that is not versioned is on the top, and then the stuff that's versioned is on the left.
yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yep.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I guess it's fine that we freeze our guides at that version. For some reason I thought that were pulled out.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no reason we couldn't change the guides after this release. It's just something that I don't think we will do. This still allows for that. So yeah, or go ahead.
I was gonna say, and we can of course change our mind and move things back under the version thing later if we want. But yeah, this is my best guess at what we probably should be doing.
Doesn't having it versioned this way also give us the advantage that you can look at the GitHub stat and over time see if people are still looking at the old ones?
I wish so. I feel like there has to be analytics for this somewhere, but we don't have I don't have Netlify admin access for this, so theoretically we should be able to get that information, but I don't know. That's a good point, though.
We just need to work with SIG-Docs on that one. I'm assuming they have the stuff.
I know Bob is the one who set this up for us, so I can reach out to him too. But it's somewhere in the Netlify integration. I don't know.
Hey Nick, just one question. With the sidebar, is that ordered by the order that it shows up in the YAML?
No, so it's actually manually ordered via the makedocs.yaml. So that's 100% YAML. It's not generated, like it's manually specified in that YAML
okay,
file.
cool. So I think
we can
one
mess with it
suggestion I
however we
have
want.
is that the stable version be first in that list, because it looks like that's the one you land on when you navigate using the title.
Yeah, so I went backwards and forwards on doing that, but yeah, that makes total sense. To have the stable version be the top, the not top one.
Awesome, thanks Nick.
Yeah, okay, no, that's easy to fix.
Yeah, that is a good point. And obviously we eventually want it to look like this, but in the couple weeks before release V1 Alpha 2, that does make sense.
Yeah, no problem. So that makes sense. And then obviously that means that when we eventually are ready to start, when we start working on future versions, we can do the same thing. Just put it down below, marked as unreleased or something like that, and then we can make changes to those docs and have them be visible on the public site without having to do a deploy preview. And if you can just click on the I did a little bit of tidying up with the enhancement proposals section. If you can just click on that for a sec. So I moved the sort of process doc from the contributing section to here, so that you get like an overview of like what we're trying to do here, and then you can see the approved gaps in the in that little drop down so that there was an overview page rather than just going straight into the first get.
Yeah, that's a really nice. I missed this change, but this is a great one. Actually, yeah, the get template feels a little out of place here. Maybe we don't need this anymore.
Or
but
we
the
It
rest-
doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And then so if you go to contributing as well, there was a bit of duplication between the enhancement tracking and backlog page and the enhancement proposal section, but I wanted to leave them there so that if you're looking at contributing as like what are we trying to do with this enhancement tracking thing? So there's quite a bit of duplication between those two pages, but again, I didn't want to do a big docs rewrite at the same time as changing all of the structure. So I thought I'll keep it to just messing with the structure mainly, and keep the actual docs changes to a minimum and make it a bit easier to review. We can come back and fix that later if we want.
I like everything. I'm just the only thing I'm worried about is burying the guides a little bit too much.
Okay.
In the reference, if we just pull up the guides as a mainline one, because that's for like a new beginner, is the easiest place for them to go to see how it works.
Okay. Mate, do you want me to, maybe I should swap it so that the guides is first, but the guides is if the guides is first in the list, then when you click into reference, it like expands out the sections to get to the first page in the list. So
that makes sense.
Yeah,
yeah, that
I
makes
just
sense.
swap that around, then that means that when you click on reference, you'll go to V1 Alpha 1 guides, and then you can see that there's guides and all that sort of stuff, and then you can go look at there.
Can we also put it at the top, like guides will just go to the latest version guides in the top menu? It's like overview, guides, reference, contributing, FAQ, enhancements.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, I think we should keep the guides versioned, but yeah, there's no reason why we can't have a top level item for it, for sure. So it'd be like guides and then V1 Alpha 1 and then V1 Alpha 2 unreleased, and then the various things underneath that. Because I think the guides
I think that's actually a good idea. I think that both API types and spec are very clearly referenced, but guides could have a very similar section to this that is just, version 2. But just, I agree with all that.
Easy. That's literally just changing the markdown, like the macdocs.yaml file. So to mess with where things are. So no problem. Easy.
Cool. This is great.
I'll make it this morning. Yeah.
Great.
Do we want to? I was saying, like, do all these things belong in reference? Because I'm just looking at the existing things. So we've taken basically API types, the current reference folder and guides, and then put it all under reference.
I think. Or go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah. I think that what Rob was saying actually makes sense. You're 100% right, Mark. That I'll pull the guides out into another top level thing. So it'll be overview, guides, reference, contributing, blah blah blah. Under guides, there will be V1 Alpha 1 and V1 Alpha 2, same as
that makes sense.
Page. Yeah, and then the guides will just have the what they have now, but it'll go straight to the getting started page. So that way, when you click on guides, you go straight to getting started for the current stable version.
Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. This is awesome. Excited to get this one in.
Yeah, no worries.
Any other comments?
We can get in.
Great. Okay. Cool. The next one on the list is V1 Alpha 2 docs. There are a few things that I think almost entirely guides that we just have not updated for V1 Alpha 2 yet. I think, Shane, you've volunteered to take on most of these. Is that correct?
Yep.
Did you want? Okay, awesome. Great. So yeah, excited to get these updated. I think they just got missed. But let anyone, add to this issue if you find other section of V1 Alpha 2 docs that is out of date. But these are all the ones I know about.
Yeah, I noticed the FAQ is out of date as well, so I'll put that in there.
Oh, good find.
Yeah.
Okay.
The FAQ is substantially out of date.
I believe that. The next one is 772. This is the PR that I've been working on for a bit. I was really just trying to get ahead of what I imagined our API reviewers were going to find and find issues with specifically. There were a lot of places where we really could have tightened up validation. So this is kind of moving them to shared types that have shared validation, a pattern we've done in a number of places, just trying to do that elsewhere. I think Mike Hyatt on a previous PR had suggested we start using regex validation more places. This introduces that. It also tries to get rid of any kind of unbounded lists by adding max length. Same with unbounded strings, all these kinds of things, just trying to make sure that we have a max length for as many things as possible, basic validation. And the other thing that I wanted to point out in this PR that is of note is there is this new invalid examples directory that is used in that in our basically E2E test run where we have a verify examples. Now this is kind of that script initially just ran through every single example, tried to kubectl apply it and make sure it worked. And this does the opposite. This runs through everything, tries to apply it and make sure there's an error. So make sure our validation catches something. It's really, really basic in terms of functionality, but hopefully that's, it's certainly better than nothing. And it makes sure that our validation is at least somewhat working. So yeah, that's the gist of this PR. There's been some good feedback on this one already. I've got some work locally that I will try to get in later today. But yeah, if you have any thoughts, let me know. But I'm hoping to get this updated soon. Cool. All right, so the other ones don't have issues yet, and they don't have anyone assigned to work on them yet either. So if anyone is feeling like they have a little bit of time to contribute, these are good opportunities. First, we need help translating the existing V1 Alpha 1 examples to V1 Alpha 2. There's a number of examples that have been translated, but I'd say that's maybe a third of our total examples. And we need the rest of those examples to also be in our V1 Alpha 2 example set. I don't think this is going to be too bad, but I think this will be a very good experience just to show, to validate the API changes we've made, make sure they make sense. And if they don't, maybe this can highlight that and we can catch it before we actually release the API. Is anyone interested in taking this one on?
Yeah, I can do it, Rob.
Awesome. Thanks. Cool. And this is really this one and the last one. Well, actually, all of these are pretty related. But I am looking for someone who's interested in writing the changelog for V1 Alpha 2. This could correspond with any of the bottom three here, but that doesn't have to. Actually, let me go through all three of these, and then we can get an idea of who wants to volunteer here. So one, a changelog.
Question about. I'm sorry. I mean, about translating the examples from the V1 Alpha 1 to V1 Alpha 2. Are you referring all the examples under the root directories? We have those routing gateway, and also we have V1 Alpha 2 there. So we have examples directory.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. So we have all these examples here. Well, backend policy is a bad one because it won't translate. But as an example, we've got this one, which is gateway class, gateway, and route. And you can see that we're using the old API version. And you can also see that we're using this kind of route selector to select routes. Those are things that would need to change because now, obviously, instead the route attaches to the gateway.
So Yeah, so it's also expected that when we do the translating to Viva Alpha 2, that we should run some test cases to verify that the route and the traffic work as expected. Do you have that kind of test cases here, or is any different process for the
Yeah, that's a good question. Unfortunately, the only test cases we have right now are just enough to make sure that what we have in examples is valid YAML, like it's a valid resource. So you can install it and it will work, but we don't have anything that goes further than that and actually, ensures that a controller will consider it valid. We just know that it will pass our CRD validation. That's all. So more would be great, but until then, we've kind of had to rely on our judgment and code review, which I know is not a perfect art here.
What do you mean the CRD definition? So it looks like we have the gateways and also we have HTTP route. If I understand correctly, I mean, those kinds of resources validation looks like we have to use some protocol like ping echo or services to validate.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, so as we're defining our CRDs, we add those little annotations. Like in that previous PR I was showing, there's things like max length, there's things like regex validation. Those are the kinds of things that are validated every time you try and install a route or a gateway or anything else. So these kinds of validation are what would be applied if I can find a good. So like there's a regex here, max length, min length, those kinds of things.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah.
I think
go ahead.
I think the question you asked there, though, sorry, I'm not sure if I was saying your name right, Jim. That can we test the examples actually do what they're supposed to do? That would be amazing if we could do that. But I think the problem is that right now, because we're defining the spec for what implementations will have to implement, no one's going to have implemented it yet for us to be able to test against anything. So we have a bit of a chicken and egg problem there.
I see.
Yeah. I think also looking at that though, Rob, the other thing we should do is we should just move the examples thing to be completely versioned. There should be no unversioned examples.
Yeah, I agree. Let me add that to the scope. I should, yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Good clarification.
Since I'm doing it anyway, I'll do that as part of the PR.
Okay.
But
great.
Yeah, if you want to note that down there. But yeah, so I think that's, and if anyone else wants to help with that, more than happy to have other people take files. Like maybe I'll do the first restructure and then leave the files there, and then other people can pick them up. It's a great way to learn how the API works, like looking between the two versions and needing to figure out the right way to do things.
Yeah, sounds great. I would like to help on this also.
No problem. Yep. So I'll get what I'll do then is I'll structure it so that the initial PR will just move everything into the version directories. And then I'll just do a quick initial PR there to do that. And then once we get that one in, then we can sort of assign the files to each other. We can agree which people do which files, and then make like separate PRs.
Sounds great. Thanks.
No problem.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, just the other things I think that we really need to have in place before V1 Alpha 2 release are that changelog, some kind of documentation and or a blog post. I think this could be the same content that describes the key changes between V1 Alpha 1 and V1 Alpha 2. I've actually been thinking this could be good content for a Kubernetes IO blog post as well. I'm not sure, again, on where we want to put this, but this seems like it would be good content as anyone who's interested in the API. And then finally, looking for someone who's interested in actually leading the V1 Alpha 2 release process. This last one specifically, we need at least one maintainer involved. So far, I think Harry and myself have released versions of the API, but very happy to have someone else be the one to click the buttons, do the formal process to actually release a version of the API. So if there's any volunteers interested in this one as well. So those are 3 things that all feel pretty related, but if there's any volunteers for any of them, I'd love to hear it.
So I don't want to take away from anyone else, but if no one else is willing to, I am. Yeah, this is my primary focus for the next little bit anyway, so I may as well drop it up.
Sorry, to clarify, for all of these or for one specific one?
So yeah, I'm happy to do the leading of the release process, and I've actually already started writing effectively a changelog, because people inside VMware were like, "What's going on with V1 Alpha 2? Can you write us a summary?"
Yes.
So I've already done that.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got. I also had to give an internal summary not too long ago, so we can compare notes on that.
Yeah,
see
cool.
where we go. And okay, great. And if we do end up doing a blog post here, we obviously need someone to lead the process on this and help write it out. But it feels like another one that could be collaboratively authored by a bunch of us. But yeah, I think does this list make sense? Is there anything we're missing here that feels like we need to get it in for release? I guess I should also, I think it goes without saying, but we need this actual approval to get in. But otherwise, is there anything else that anyone can think of?
I think this is good. I have one question about the blog post description changes. The blog belongs to current website, or is some specific blog that we're expecting to document those changes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we need some kind of content on like our own gateway API.sigs, our own website to describe these changes. I'm not sure where that belongs. Maybe that's I don't know. Nick, since you're restructuring it, you may have an idea. But I also think we need something on the Kubernetes website, potentially the Kubernetes blog, to describe these changes in this progress. At least I think that would be helpful.
Does Netlify support a blog post format? I guess we could use any old page and just put a date on it. It becomes a blog post.
Yeah, I think even that's what Kubernetes website does. It's just markdown with the date. At least last I checked.
Then yeah, I think it makes sense to have a blog. I mean, it allows the project to provide kind of point in time communications to the community, which I think is helpful. And all it would require us is to add a new page that has dates on it. And I think that's V1 Alpha 2 is definitely notable enough, I think, to have another Kubernetes blog post. There's definitely, I don't know if anyone else knows this, but we did find out that was the #1 blog post for like 30 days running on the Kubernetes IO site. So I think there's definitely like appetite for it. I'm happy to take my name out of the running since I did the last one. That leaves the opportunity for someone else to do the Kubernetes one.
That's awesome. I feel like I heard that once and I completely forgot that we had that kind of usage or views on that blog post. Cool. And I guess we'll leave that open for a little bit since it's going to be one of the later things we do. I don't know. But I will say you did a great job, obviously, on the first blog post. So if no one else is interested, I'm very happy to still have you involved. But I know you've got a million things on your plate. So
yeah, I think like with V1 Alpha 2, since it feels like there's a lot more implementations that will be present, that's a great thing. Like we can route people to try things out from that blog post.
Yeah, agreed. Okay. Yeah, that's all I had on this required for release section here. The other thing that I think is really nice to have, and maybe Nick, I don't know if you want to talk about this more. You'd mentioned that you might have someone, come in and take a look at our docs content as a whole and provide suggestions on how we can improve it. I think there's lots of room for improvement here, and I'm wondering if you have tips or timeline on that or anything like that.
So no, I need to check in with Celeste. So Celeste Vaughan from the CNCF, she's one of the CNCS like paid tech writers. She coordinated a docs review for Contour that was amazing, and so I asked her if we were allowed to use that as process as well, and she was like, "Oh, I don't know," but in short, the eventual answer was yes. So she said that she was, it's holiday season in the US, she was away, and so she's going to look at it when she's back. So I'll just follow up with her. It'd be good if I could get a bunch of these docs improvements in beforehand and get her to review like the stuff that we've a slightly better version of the doc site rather than let's be charitable and say poster child for organic growth we had earlier. So yeah, I think that's what I'd like to definitely do that. The other thing I'd like to do for the main page is, I think a while ago I put a sort of summary of what the objects were for, what I thought we should say the objects were for into the channel. That got pretty broad agreement. So I'll also do a PR about that one. The sort of, because I'd like that to be early on in the sort of user journey of using the site, that there's a thing that says we anticipate the core types of route objects, here's what they're intended to be used for and how you use them and the differences between them. Because I think that's one of the things we really poorly explain in a moment. And I know that when I've got queries about the Gateway API, lots of people are like, oh, I want to use TCP route for this because it's a TCP connection. It's like, oh, you're actually using SNI for routing, so that should be a TLS route. But we've never actually said that in the user-facing docs. It's in the like the actual API spec if you read carefully, but there's nothing up front that says that stuff. And I think we just need to make some of those things more explicit, which will save us all implement as both implementers and maintainers and contributors to this project a lot of time and effort, I think.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm excited for all these improvements to get in. Yeah, okay. This one thing I volunteer to take this one on because I think I wrote the initial security model docs, and what you said about organic growth is definitely true. This is very much, unfortunately, just something that feels very outdated now and confusing. And anyway, that whole page needs some cleanup, so I can work on that one. Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's enough of that. The other things I wanted to highlight here were just Signet PR review follow-up so far. Just Cal has given feedback, at least last time I checked, but he had some good questions on here that I thought were worth broader discussion. So yeah, let's get into them. One of his is, I think, very related to discussions we've had before. I couldn't find a good reference for those discussions, but the concern that with gateway class and parameters ref, if anything about the gateway class changes, it's unclear what happens to the gateway. We've kind of left that open, and maybe more open than we need to. I'm not sure. And so his question is really about how we avoid that kind of massive blast radius, I guess, right? So you can imagine if a gateway class changes, references invalid parameters, something like that, does it blow away all your gateways that are based on that gateway class? I know we've had at least some discussion around treating gateway class as a template. And I think that's a rough summary of what we're planning to do with GKE's implementation, in the sense that the gateway class affects the gateway as the gateway is being created. and then that relationship is basically gone. Like if the gateway class changes, it does not affect the gateway from that point in time on. I don't know. Is anyone else approaching this problem similarly, different?
I think
ideas.
For Contour, we were originally planning on having that have like a config object. We were in the process of working on a Contour config object for the Contour operator, and so we were basically just going to use that same object as a reference in there. I think that because we've changed the design, that's no longer valid. I think that something like it being a template probably is a better pattern rather than it be a fully reconciled thing, because as you say, like the blast radius for then making changes to that parameters ref is terrifying. We can explicitly say, look, I think that we could say it as we make recommendations for how this flow should work, but it's they're shoulds rather than musts. I think is probably the best way to go about it in my view.
Yeah, at least like when we got to implementing it, having it be a reconciled object would be so challenging just to implement for us, and also the damage it could create. There just didn't seem like there's any benefit to it. Like nobody would want to use it in that way. So yeah, that's where it felt like, okay, well, is this part of the spec to say that it's not a reconciled object and it's only a template? So yeah.
Is anyone out there doing anything different than this kind of template approach, or planning on a different approach here?
I actually need to check what we're currently doing.
Sure.
The rest of the team has been working on some of this stuff while I've been focusing on the API itself. So I need to check before I 100%
Sure.
But yeah, I think having it as a template sounds reasonable to me.
Cool. Yeah, and I agree with the suggestion that this is should and not must. I don't think we can be too prescriptive here, but I think it's a good suggestion, if nothing else, to use this pattern.
Rob, I think the meaning of should and must are the same.
Really? Oh.
I thought that should implied a level of optionality that must does not.
They're definitely not the same.
Oh, they're not the same?
Yeah, must is must, and should is
oh, sorry, it's should and may. Okay, yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah,
I will follow up on.
So does that make sense to you, Jeff, as someone who's spent more time reading RFCs than me, probably? Like that we can say, if you're going to use this, you should use it as a template, for these reasons.
That would be the proper terminology. Yes. I think the only concern I would have is if we're making it implementation, implementers having the choice of how do they behave, then it could be confusing for users that might be used to the API the gateway API spec and using it, but for some reason they're working with a different implementation or something, and they could really screw themselves up if one implementation is different from the one they're used to.
Yeah, agreed.
I'm not sure it's so dramatic of a difference, whether it's one way or the other, that it really invites somebody unintentionally creating disaster, in a sense, if they've changed from one implementation to another.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we could say it's up to you how you do this, but you must not do a full reconciliation loop on these parameters refs. Or we could just say you must treat this as a creation time template, and at least, and then carefully manage. If you are going to do changes on it, then you should be extremely careful with them because the blast radius is very big, or something like that.
I think this one we still have some time to. It sounds like most implementations are actually going to the template behavior, so it would be useful to. I do think like we should probably be template. I don't know if at this time we can say must.
I guess the advantage of at least saying should for now is that if people don't want to do it, then we can kind of say, well, why? Like we can probe for use cases and stuff like that, and understand if how why people would not do that. Like I agree with Bowie. Like I'm kind of not sure what people are doing yet, so I don't want to kind of reluctant to do must yet. But I agree that it's terrifying. The idea of having a fully reconciled object there is just, well, that's scary. Aside from how difficult it would be to implement, because practically, you get, depending on exactly how you do, if you're doing like dynamic clients or informers or anything like that, you're going to end up tearing down a lot of your controller and rebuilding it every time that object changes. Then.
So
Does this feel like
on the implementation side, at least for Envoy, kind of a natural approach is to look at all your stuff, look at all your CIDs, generate the Envoy proxy and proxy object, and then smash it down. If you're not keeping state about what you've already generated, then how would you implement a template approach?
Yeah, that is the problem. We've gone to great lengths to try and keep some basic sense of state in GKE to avoid this. But that's a good point. That is a problem with requiring templating behavior, is that you need to understand what point in time in what set of parameters you use to configure a gateway.
Yeah, you need to snapshot everything. You need, or
yeah,
at least like logically, you kind of snapshot everything at the point of which the gateway was created.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, John, you go. I've talked a lot.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, one possible solution is that things that are dynamic, that are, say, for Envoy, like part of XDS, you actually consider to be like policies that are kind of dynamically attached to the gateway, and only use gateway class parameters for, say, configuring the actual deployment of Envoy itself. So for us, I don't think we're planning to use gateway class at all so far. But I think we would be closer to that pattern, and that may somewhat solve that issue. It really depends where you want to put the configs, I guess. But then it's kind of like gateway class is like your deployment template, sort of, and then everything else is kind of dynamic policy.
I think that's a good way to put it. That if we're talking about it being a template, it's like it's a deployment template for the gateway, and then that makes it more sense. I do think, James, that your point is 100% fair about Envoy. That the obvious way, and speaking as someone who maintains a controller that works in exactly the way you described, it's actually a bit of an any pattern. I think that to have a controller that just takes things and builds a state and then jams that whole state down to Envoy every time. I think that has created problems for Contour. And it's better to keep some state and do incremental XDS and a bunch of other stuff like that. I guess I agree with you, but I think we need to be careful that we encourage people to do things in a way that's going to be better for them in the long term.
Yeah, I just wanted to make it clear, make sure that everyone kind of was on the same page about like the implementation difficulties in both directions.
Yeah. So I think I think that is a good comment for you to put down, Rob. I think that's
okay. So yeah, that I will need to add some more context around this, but I think the gist of what we're saying here is that we want to recommend using template behavior, and if deviating from that, implementations must clearly document that. But basically, the default interpretation of this is templating, but we do leave some room to use other approaches. Okay, I will run with that. Feel free to add comments. This is obviously linked in the agenda, and I've been trying to follow up on the various comments in this PR, but definitely if you're interested, there's some good comments and good things to get people thinking. So if you have any, if you want to help out in responding to these, that's always appreciated too. Okay, the next one that I thought was kind of interesting is this confusion. I'd never really thought of it as being a confusing distinction, but the confusion between the addresses on a gateway and the host name on a listener. And especially now that we have an address of type host name on the gateway, where we allow for that inside spec. And this leading to some form of confusion about what the purpose of each field is. And I don't think we've clearly distinguished that in the docs. I tried to explain it, but I'm interested in others' takes on this.
What is the concrete meaning for the address of type host name? Maybe that would just clear it up instead of talking about it in the abstract.
I mean, honestly, I think this is really just meant to solve the use case of a certain cloud that the provider that exposes their load balancers via host name, CNAME, instead of a IP address.
Okay, we should just explicitly say that and point to other examples. I think didn't Ingress also end up in this situation?
Yeah, they did.
Okay, yeah, then that should be easy to resolve.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference between the difference between the two fields is that the addresses field is like, yeah, as you say, Rob, it's a request for the outside address of the gateway, and the host names on listeners are about routing discrimination. How do you route requests or connections to the routes behind the thing and choosing between different routes. Thus routing discriminator.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can see the confusion of should I, if I want this domain, this host name foo.com to be associated with my gateway, should I put it in the spec.addresses and then rely on something like external DNS to pick that up and make that a reality? I think you could interpret that as a possibility based on our current spec, even though I don't think that was the intent.
Yeah, I think it actually is. It's actually one of the things that's probably worth us is talking more to the external DNS maintainers about how they are considering making things work with Gateway and how we think it should, because that's going to be a very big part of how people use this API.
Yeah,
external DNS and Cert Manager are the two obvious things that we need to make the experience nice and smooth.
Agreed. Okay, I'll keep on going. I'll make a note to follow up with some external DNS maintainers as well on that one. The last one was about protocol confusion. I didn't get enough time to really look into this one. I think, yeah, it is the last comment on the PR. And the confusion was basically about the mixed concepts here. The idea that we have both HTTP, HTTPS, and TLS, which could be over TCP or HTTP, and trying to make sense of all of that.
I think TLS people are taking it literally, as in TLS is involved somehow, whereas what we mean by TLS route is that it is a router that only cares about looking at SNI and other TLS hello fields.
So in this case, the confusion is actually just on gateway protocols, the supported protocols on gateway.
On listener, yeah.
Yeah, listener.
So I feel like also people coming from SIG network are going to have a very, they're used to network concepts, right? They're used to thinking about things in terms of like layered protocols. So smashing different layers together is going to be, is going to feel strange to them.
Yeah, I think that it definitely warrants better explanation in my mind, it's something like, this is actually a syntactic sugar for sort of choosing the classes of routes that can be attached here. Like that's really what the protocol field is. It's like a syntactic trigger for saying if it's HTTP, then it's only HTTP routes, and they probably and they shouldn't have TLS details. And if it's HTTPS, then they're HTTP routes, optionally with TLS details. And TLS means should only be TLS routes or something like that. But they're effectively syntactic sugar for choosing for a set of kinds that are valid for going for valid routes to be attached to this listener, rather than a actual protocol selection.
Yeah, I think this is an area we still need to kind of just nail down. Like, for example, is protocol type the maximum layer that you've selected here? And then, smashing together layers is what, for example, the quick protocol does. And what would we do here?
I think for quick is HTTPS. Oh, I think that's kind of the natural way to say that, because we don't distinguish HTTP2 from HTTP 1.1. So HTTP 3 would be kind of combined with HTTPS. I think the problem here is that once you try to carefully delineate everything across, protocol layers, things aren't in practice delineated specifically clearly.
I agree.
And then you also get this explosion of complexity, which proxies don't actually do. Like trying to tell people, like getting people to configure things in terms of, oh, here's a TCP, and the TCP goes up to some HTTP, and then, we might as well just be configuring Nginx at that point.
It's not clear that even the proxies support all the different combinations. So you end up in this like having to describe in detail something that is like very locked in which ones are actually possible.
Yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of stand by what I said, that it's syntactic sugar for a set of kind selectors, really. That's effectively what it is.
Yeah, I would quibble a bit about what it's syntactic sugar for, but broadly, yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, but so you agree that it's syntactic sugar for something?
Yeah, it's definitely syntactic sugar for something.
Yeah, and so I guess that's the key thing that we need to say. Like, it's not that this is this is intended to be used as syntactic sugar for associating a set of routes or somehow, and it's poorly defined at the moment, agreed, but it's not about selecting a specific protocol, because the routes that can be there are confused about the levels, because you can have a TCP route and a TLS route.
So it's both about matching request, matching traffic, right, in a broad sense. So how should I get some traffic coming in, right? What is that traffic? Is it a request? Is it something? It's something, right? So how do you match that? How do you know how to deal with that? And it's also about how to terminate that traffic and then how to send the request. So it's about those. Maybe that's one of the reasons why it's kind of difficult to describe, because it's really about the multiple things. It's about how to
Rob,
terminate.
I'll take a to-do to see if I can clarify this more. I feel like in some ways it's like the English word irregardless, which like makes no sense, but people know what you're saying.
Which isn't what Nick suggested earlier on, where he'll go through and document like what is like at a high level, what each route is. That should help significantly here.
Like maybe if we
Yeah,
just
I was
call
thinking
it,
of like a
called it
table,
like
just
listener type instead of protocol type, maybe people would have that would defeat all the preconceptions people have about the word protocol.
I think that's a pretty good hack. But I agree with Harry that I think part of the confusion is that we have all of these things about about different types of routes and what different types of routes do what, that are, if you've been using the API for a while, are pretty clear, but we don't, like I said, we don't explicitly say that stuff very well. And that's why I think, the table that I was talking about, maybe that needs to go in here as an explanation for Carl, but we need to have that as one of the first things you see is like, so you can create all these different types of route objects, and here's what we intend them to be used for is really important.
Yeah, agreed. That could really help make this a little bit easier to understand. I'm going to leave this as a note for Bowie to follow up, but of course, anyone else is also welcome to chime in here on the thread or as a PR.
Yeah, I'll open an issue and we can, I'll just drop it here. I don't know if the cross-reference will actually be manageable. I'll drop something.
Okay. One thing that I just remembered in Slack before we end this meeting, there was a question in Slack. There's a thread on there about which implementations are planning to support V1 Alpha 2 and V1 Alpha 1. Like, are there any implementations out there that are planning to support both API versions at the same time? Or are implementations going direct to V1 Alpha 2 and dropping V1 Alpha 1? I think there's already decent discussion in Slack, but if anyone else had thoughts, there's 1 minute left.
Contra is going to go straight to V1 Alpha 2.
I did have one thought. EastGeo is going to do whatever everyone else does, but would it make sense to kind of release Alpha 2 internally to controllers and then give us like a week or two to, maybe that's way too short, but to kind of put together our V1 Alpha 2 support and then go publicly announce it so that people can actually try it out once we release it? Or I guess that could just be the blog post and stuff that's kind of publicizing it. I was just thinking it would kind of suck if we blast to the world like, hey, we have this great new API and there's no implementations.
Yeah, I had thought about, specific to a blog post, it would be really nice if there were at least a couple implementations that people could go try it out with right away. I think we're awfully close to having something that could qualify as a release candidate, at least. I'm hoping that we're not going to have like huge, massive changes as a result of this SIG network review. But I could get on board with something more formal than that, even. I don't know what others think here.
Yeah, it certainly would be nice to get started on the implementation already, especially, it's a pretty big change. There's a lot to do. Well, since I'm volunteered already to lead the release process, I guess I'll have it, see if we can do something about cutting a release candidate or something like that.
Yeah, that sounds, I think that's a really reasonable step at this point. I look back at V1 Alpha 1, and I think we had 2 release candidates before we actually cut V1 Alpha 1, and it seems like a similar concept here would make sense.
Yeah, that'll at least let us implementers get started on the big chunks of, policy and removing backend policy and changing how the route binding works, which are sort of big stones.
Yep. Cool. Okay, well, I think that's.
We'll give that after, Rob.
Perfect. All right, well, thanks everyone. I think that's it for today. See you in Slack and GitHub and wherever else. And thanks to everyone for the discussion.
Cheers.